Australia has been known to be a producer of some of the world's best music, which is something that I've covered in some of my other videos. Among those notable Australian acts is the indie electronic dance trio known as Rüfüs Du Sol. The group consists of 3 friends who are all producers, but they each play different roles when performing live. Tyrone Lindqvist is the singer and also plays the guitar. Jon George plays the keyboard, and James Hunt is the drummer. Their skills do overlap quite a bit in these categories, but these are the respective roles that they have decided to take on. The band has been active for nearly 13 years and have attained a number of accolades in that time, such as 5 Grammy nominations with 1 win and 20 ARIA Award nominations with 4 wins. They have cultivated a unique sound which has garnered them millions of fans from around the world. In order to understand how they came to achieve all of this, we're going to take a look at their career from a bird's eye view, starting back at the formation of the band in 2010. Before they ever formed the band, Tyrone Lindqvist, Jon George, and James Hunt all knew each other from when they attended St. Ignatius College boarding school in Sydney. For all the Americans watching, this was the equivalent of a K-12 school, which are often called colleges in Australia. Tyrone was friends with Alex George, who is the younger brother of now fellow band member Jon George, which is how the two originally got in touch. Jon had studied audio engineering in school, and one day he hit up Tyrone for a jam sesh, which was when they discovered that they both shared a passion for electronic music. They decided that they wanted to make some music of their own, so they recruited their 3rd member, James Hunt, to complete the trio. In November of 2010, the 3 of them were on vacation in Byron Bay, and they wrote their first song together. They realized that they sounded great together, and they produced a self-titled EP under the name Rüfüs, which was released on January 1st, 2011. It was moderately successful, with 2 of the songs landing on the Hype Machine charts. Paris Collides landed at number 8, and We Left hit number 13. Also, the music video for We Left received a Vimeo Awards nomination for Best Music Video. The video was directed by Tyrone's friend and Jon George's younger brother, Alex, who also goes by the name of Kotsky. Kotsky has directed many of their film clips from the beginning of the band, and he now serves as their creative director. With all of the band's early success, they gathered enough recognition to get booked for 2 festivals in Sydney in 2011. Parklife Festival and Homebake Festival. When the trio started Rüfüs, their goals for the band were rather humble, mostly aiming to play various venues around Sydney. But it didn't take long for them to expand their ambitions after realizing what their music was capable of. The next year, in April of 2012, they released their 2nd EP, Blue, which was just as well received as their debut EP. Only 3 months later, they released a remix EP that contained a total of 6 remixes of the tracks This Summer and Selena from their Blue EP, one of which was their own remix. The following year, on August 9th of 2013, they released their debut album called Atlas. Less than 3 weeks after its release, it landed the #1 spot on the Australian Albums chart. It also won an Australian Independent Records Award for Best Independent Dance/Electronica Album. Their home country of Australia had quickly taken recognition of their talent, but it took a little while for the rest of the world to catch on. In 2014, they moved to Berlin for a period of time during the winter to begin working on their 2nd album. They immersed themselves in the culture of the German city, and they used it as fuel to inspire their work. They became inspired by the underground dance music and techno scene there, and it led them in a direction of creating an album both fit for club environments as well as headphone listeners. The album wasn't released until 2 years later in 2016, but we'll get to that in a bit. Around the spring of 2014, they had began playing some shows in the United States, but they ran into some issues regarding their name. Up until that point, they were just Rüfüs, but there was already a band in the United States who had trademarked that name. They decided to go with the name Rüfüs Du Sol while touring in the US, but they still presented their name as Rüfüs to the rest of the world until 2018, when they officially became known as Rüfüs Du Sol everywhere. Throughout the rest of 2014 and 2015, they continued to play shows in the United States, Europe, and Australia, but they still hadn't blown up at that point, at least not anywhere near the level they're at now. In the summer of 2015, they released the first song off of their upcoming sophomore album called You Were Right, which won an ARIA Award for Best Dance Release and is now their most popular song of all time. They followed up by releasing the 2nd track off the album, Like an Animal, and in January of 2016, they finally released the album called Bloom. And just like the album that preceded it, it gained popularity in Australia before spreading worldwide. This was the album that really allowed them to break through into the US market, which was proved when they had their first appearance at Coachella just 3 months after its release. The band was stunned at how many people showed up to their set, and it really gave them a tangible representation of just how impactful their music had become. They were also rebooked to play Coachella the following year, which is not a common occurrence for most artists. A couple months later, they were exposed to even more fans in the United States when they got to play at Red Rocks Amphitheater for the first time when they opened for Odessa. Odessa had also helped them gain notoriety in the US when they released the Say a Prayer for Me remix EP on their Foreign Family Collective label, which was actually how I personally first found out about them. They got to return to Red Rocks again the following year, being brought along by Chromeo for their Funk on the Rocks show. By 2018, they were getting booked for more major festivals such as Bonnaroo and Austin City Limits. While their live shows were gathering together a fan base in the public eye, they had been crafting their third album in private. Now let's rewind a little bit back to 2016. With their ongoing rise in the US, it made the most sense for them to relocate. All three of them loved the vibe of Southern California, specifically Joshua Tree and Death Valley, so in 2016 they decided to move to Venice Beach and they began working on their third album. They've always tried to channel the physical place where they record their albums into their records. Atlas was Sydney, Bloom was Berlin, and their third album, Solace, was California. They hired a shaman to come into their studio and decorate it so that they could draw inspiration from it. In an interview, Jon said, he ended up putting all these materials everywhere and LED lighting. He would have one wall with an underwater theme, another wall with seashells, another wall with a desert theme like Joshua Tree. He really created this otherworldly vibe. During the time in which they were crafting the album, they took a consciousness-expanding trip to Joshua Tree, which inspired the track Lost in My Mind. In October of 2018, Solace was finally released. The album got them a pair of Grammy nominations, and it also won an ARIA Award for Best Dance Release. At the beginning of the following month, they played 3 sold-out nights in a row at the Shrine Expo Hall in Los Angeles, which was a major milestone of their success. They continued on to tour around the US showing off their new music, and they had some shows in Europe as well as some homecoming shows in Australia. They returned to Coachella for the third time in 2019 and played various other major festivals that year and in the beginning of 2020. But then everything was shaken up when the COVID lockdowns hit. They had their first headline show at Red Rocks scheduled for later that year, which they unfortunately missed out on, but there was a silver lining. By that point in their career, they were nearly 10 years into the project, and the craziness of the music industry had taken its toll. Their personal relationships with their fellow band members had become somewhat strained over the years, and with everything coming to an abrupt halt, they were able to take time to mend those relationships. They spent much of the downtime together in their newly adopted spiritual home with Joshua Tree, working on their new album, as well as working on their interpersonal relationships. During their time there, they released a 45-minute live performance from the desert, which has amassed 24 million views. The following year in 2021, their return to the hustle and bustle they once knew was kicked off with back-to-back sold-out nights at Red Rocks, their first time headlining the iconic venue. They followed it up with performances at Bonnaroo, Governor's Ball, Austin City Limits, and more. On October 21st of that year, they finally released their 4th album that they had been working on in Joshua Tree, called Surrender, with the name likely alluding to their consciousness-expanding experience in Joshua Tree that I mentioned earlier. It landed them 3 Grammy nominations, with the song Alive winning them their first ever Grammy for Best Dance Recording. It also received 5 ARIA nominations, and they won 2 of those. After the release of the album, they kicked off an international tour that continued up until August 12th of this year, and now they finally have some time to rest again, or possibly get started on their 5th album. They only have one more upcoming show planned, where they will play in Mexico City on October 27th. It has now been nearly 2 years since the release of Surrender, so they might be looking for a new place to gain inspiration for their next album, but only time will tell. It's fascinating how they've been able to retain their remarkably distinct sound for over a decade while simultaneously growing it and adding depth to it. Their inspiration for each album that they translate sonically seems to become more meaningful and more complex as time goes on, and it feels like we're able to witness a glimpse of their personal journeys through every body of work. I believe that to be a major reason as to why so many people connect with their music on such a personal level. It's inspired by real-life experiences that so many people can relate to on some level, rather than just being a simple arrangement of pleasing sounds. Rüfüs Du Sol has carved out their own lane in the world of electronic music, both musically and from a live experience, and while they've already experienced a level of longevity that many artists are striving for, I have a feeling that we've only seen a few chapters of this journey.